We are back now after the month of July. We had 4 lovely women that spoke, and I hope that you got to hear them. If you didn't, go back on our Facebook page and listen to them. They're really good. You'll be very blessed. Tonight, Stephanie is on Facebook, and so if you have any prayer requests or any praises, please post them. We want to know what your prayer needs are and any praises that you have, because we want to rejoice with you in that. And we are still taking offerings and donations for our technology equipment. We're very close to being at our goal, and Stephanie will post the link for that. So if you'd like to give, it'll be a tax deductible donation. If you want to email us, please feel free to. It's realitypiety@gmail.com. And we're just glad to be back with y'all. And one big announcement is September 1st, we will be in person again, but we will be meeting at St. Matthew's Church on 50th Street. And Stephanie's going to put all of that in the comments. And last but not least, after Scott's teaching, we will have Zoom discussion afterwards. So if you will please share this right now on your Facebook page so it can get out to more people, that would be great. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this time that we're all back together again, and I thank you for the words that you've given Scott to teach us tonight in 1 Samuel. Lord, just speak through him. God, just open up our ears, our hearts, our mind, and our soul to what you want us to receive from your word. And Lord, I just praise you and thank you for this day. And Lord, I just pray your Holy Spirit present upon all of us at this time, and that we will lift up our voices and praise you, not only when things are going well, but also during the storm. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
How good, you are good. When there's nothing good in me, you are love on display for all to see. You are light, when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you have covered all my sin. You are peace, when my fear is crippling. You are truth, in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in the breath that's lost its sting. Oh, I'm running to your arms, I'm running to your arms. The riches of your love, they're always here enough. Nothing compares to your embrace. Out of the world, forever loving.
job, y'all. Can I move this? Is that all right? This very expensive high technology thing. Well, beloved, it's so good to be back, although I'll say that you had a blessed month with those who were sharing and teaching with you, and I'm so grateful for the 4 ladies that took the time and effort, and Todd's help with putting that so that we could get it online, and in giving giving the some of us a needed break, and I'm just so thankful for that chance. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for the way that you embraced these ladies as they shared, and thank you for joining us again tonight. And tonight we're going to dive into 1 Samuel chapter 21. Now it's going to take us, here's my plan. It's going to take us till about the middle of September, because after tonight we're going to start trying to run through 2 chapters at a time. And then in the middle of September, we're going to switch from the Old Testament and start a series of studies in the New Testament. I'm not real sure yet what that will be, but I've been praying, seeking the Lord, and knowing that I want us to pursue something that's in the New Testament. But I don't want to leave 1 Samuel unfinished, and so we're going to move through it a little faster after tonight. So if you'll join with me at 1 Samuel chapter 21. Now I'm going to say, I'm not going to read the chapter. I'm just going to pick out verses as I go and read those verses, and then work on some explanation or conversation about that verse. I want to say up front, though, that this is one of the most difficult chapters in 1 Samuel. It's the most difficult to understand. It requires a lot of background, and it requires a lot of filling in the blanks. And those who interpret this chapter are often all over the map. And not saying that all of that is wrong. I'm just saying that there's different kinds of insights that people will have about the strangeness of this chapter, and then where to take that is just another question. So I hope, beloved, that I can offer some observations from this chapter that will be a benefit to you. But I'm going to say up front, I don't think I'm going to tell you anything tonight that you don't already know. Now, if that means that you want to check out now, then I understand. Bless you. But anyway, those who stay with us, we're going to try to walk through this very, very strange chapter. 1 Samuel chapter 21. Now, I want to recap, because we haven't looked at 1 Samuel in a month. And so in chapter 20, just sort of recap a little bit and then get to chapter 21. In chapter 20, it becomes very, very clear that Saul is committed to kill David. Jonathan defends David, and Saul speaks some very nasty insults to his own son. And so then we have the scene where Jonathan comes to a specific field where David is hiding. He shoots an arrow. When he shoots the arrow, he's speaking to the lad that's running, the young armor bearer that's running to get the arrow. But in truth, what he's doing is he's speaking to David. And he says these words. This is New American Standard. Hurry. Be quick, do not stay. Words that would have crushed David. Well, Jonathan sends the armor bearer away, and then they meet and they say goodbye. It's a very, very painful goodbye. And now David is for sure all alone and on the run. And he'll be on the run for about 10 years now. So can you imagine trying to hide from the President of the United States for 10 years? Or some dictator in whatever country you might be in. Now, the first place David goes to, this is verse 1. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone? No one with you." Okay, so essentially he asked really two questions, but it's the same question. Why are you alone? And why is no one with you? Now, the first place David goes is Nob. Now, this is a small village or community outside of Jerusalem. It was known as a priestly city. In other words, it was mostly populated by priests. And it is here where, it doesn't say this, but when you begin to fill in some of the gaps, it's here where they have brought the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle was the place, the facility that was meant to house the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is somewhere else. Evidently, when the tabernacle was at Shiloh under the priest of Eli, at some point Shiloh was attacked and destroyed. They moved the tabernacle to Nob, which is just a little ways outside of Jerusalem, and it's here that it's been set up, and it's here where priests are attending to the tabernacle, even though the Ark of the Covenant, which would be the symbolism of God's presence, even though the Ark of the Covenant is not there. And, it just raises a question about how often do we attend church, or how often do we practice spiritual disciplines? How often do we engage in spiritual exercises and things that are supposed to be making us grow, changing us more and more to be like Jesus? How often are we doing that and God just isn't there? God isn't being a part of it. In fact, today I was in a discussion about discipleship, and the discussion is that in church settings we do programs in order to get next to people, to develop relationships with them, so that we can then, with those who are open to it, begin a discipling relationship. And I was thinking about that, and I've noticed that often I need reminders that this is why I'm doing this program. I'm doing this Sunday school, or I'm doing this Bible study, or I'm doing this event that's inviting people to come and get to know us. I'm doing all that, but I get bogged down in the doing of it, the performing of the event or the program, and I forget that it's really for something else beyond that it's for relationship. It's for discipleship. I need reminders. And then what happens is when I forget that part of it, what I'm doing is I'm doing spiritual activity, but not with God's presence. So this is sort of what here is the tabernacle set up at Nob, and here is the priest, and the priest that we will see is Ahimelech, and so here is David coming. This is the first place he comes to, and I'm going to end with a conversation about the importance of this being the first place that he comes to. But I just think it's interesting that the ark is not yet here at the tabernacle, and that sometimes mirrors exactly what we're doing, where we are involved in religious activity, spiritual activity, but it really isn't with the presence of God. Now, it's interesting, they start up a conversation, and Ahimelech's first question is, why are you here alone? Why isn't someone with you? Now, you need to understand that when someone from the royal court was traveling, they never traveled alone. It was just unexpected. No one would ever do that. One was it wasn't safe to travel alone, but you just wouldn't do that. So this is why Ahimelech asks the question, and it seems to be his top concern. Why are you by yourself? Why isn't someone with you? And notice he also comes trembling. This means that that he is experiencing some deep fear as he approaches David. Now, we're not real sure what is causing him to be afraid. It could be that he has heard about the bad blood between Saul and David, and he's worried about getting caught between the two, that could turn out disastrous, because if he ends up helping David, Saul would see that, and Saul would come against the priest there at Nob. And in the next chapter, we'll see that's exactly what happens. A terrible, terrible tragedy. But anyway, Ahimelech is very concerned. He's trembling, very fearful. So then David speaks to him, but what David does is he speaks something that is just not, it's a deception. Okay? In other words, Ahimelech recognizes this looks really fishy. And he probably also knows that him and David have had a falling out. And so, what is this going to involve with him? And, how great of a risk to his life is this encounter with David? Now, what's interesting, just sort of as a sidestep, Jesus uses this very story of where David asked for the showbread, or the bread that's laid out in the tabernacle in the presence of the Lord. It's called the bread of presence. The bread of the presence. And it was meant for, it was laid in the presence of the Lord for a week in the tabernacle. And then when it was replaced, the loaves of bread that were taken away were then eaten by the priest. It was considered holy bread, sacred bread. And only the priests were supposed to eat it. And so in this scene, we see David telling this story that it's a great story. We get the idea that David is really very smart and he can think on his feet very, very well. So he tells the story that he's on a secret mission. He can't tell anybody what it is. That sort of gives Ahimelech plausible deniability. In other words, what he's doing is he's doing this to preserve not just himself, but also Ahimelech. And what he needs is bread. And that really is, that makes it even more fishy. In other words, what we're going to see is that we're going to see level after level after level of strangeness in this story. But now, I just want to quickly say, Jesus uses this story in the New Testament. When in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's a story of him and the disciples walking through a field of grain, of wheat, and they're hungry. They haven't eaten, and so they're picking heads of grain and eating it, chewing it. Now, I don't know if you've ever done that. That isn't the most appetizing way to have some nourishment. But anyway, this is what they're doing. The Pharisees see it and they accuse Jesus of violating the law. I think it was on the Sabbath. And so Jesus lifts up this story of David receiving this sacred bread from the priest that was meant for the priest to eat. But yet God doesn't condemn David for eating this bread. And so what Jesus is trying to say is that the Pharisees are missing the point of the law. The law was not meant to diminish life. The law was meant to preserve it. And so human need trumps the law, is what he was saying. And there was a human need for the disciples to eat. It was more important than observing the strictness of the law. And he was saying the same thing as what's happening here, is that there was a human need, and Ahimelech recognizes it, and so he gives David the bread. Now, okay, now many people think that at this point, what David is doing is he's lying. I think, and I guess you could say that, But I think what that means, what really is going on, when you say David is sinning because he's lying, he's creating a deception, I think that misses the point here. I think what David is trying to do is exactly what Jesus was talking about in the New Testament when he raises up the story. Is I think what David's trying to do is he's trying to preserve his life and also Ahimelech's life, and giving Ahimelech plausible deniability. But when David asks for the food, after describing that he's on this secret mission, he has soldiers with him, but he's put them in a certain place, hidden them in a certain place. None of this can be verified. And so what happens then is that after he tells Ahimelech that story, he says, do you have any food? Now that's like saying, okay, the president has he's commissioned me and sent me on a top secret mission. I have people that are helping me. They're hidden right now. It's an urgent mission. We're in a hurry to get it done. But we don't have any food. Do you have any canned goods in your house? That's just that. Okay, so that just makes it strange. Okay, here's our first introduction to the strangeness of this. David is alone. He has no weapons. He has no armor, and you don't see his soldiers, and yet he's on this secret mission, this urgent secret mission for the king. That's level 1 strange. But then level 2 strange, and we add another level of strangeness when he says, and by the way, do you have any food? Wait a minute. If the king sent you on this top secret mission, why isn't he supplying you with what you need? Why isn't there food with you already if the king commissioned you to do this? So here we have just another aspect of strangeness. This is verses 1, 2, and 3 as we're beginning into the chapter. And it's just like, okay, he's commissioned me. I have this very secret thing. There are young people, young soldiers, young men who are with me. They're in a certain hiding place. But by the way, do you have any bread? Okay. So verse 4, the priest answers David. He says, there is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread, if only the young men have kept themselves from women. Now, let me kind of explain that. But by the way, here we go. Okay, so far we have 2 levels of something strange. Here's David showing up by himself, no weapons, no armor, on a secret mission. And then level 2, he's asking for food. Like the king didn't give him what he needed to do this mission. Okay, but then Ahimelech's answer just increases the strange factor here in this chapter. First of all, there's only the consecrated bread. Now, Nob is a village of priests, and I would think that means that the priests live there with their families. Okay, so here's this village, and there aren't any kitchens in Nob? Do they have to send out delivery for food from Jerusalem? What is there no, is there no pantries in Nob? Only thing there is this consecrated bread. Now, when he says that the men, he said in his answer, he says, there is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread or holy bread, if only the young men have kept themselves from women. Now, in other words, he's saying the young men, you and the young men can have it if you've kept yourself clean. That's the issue. And see what the idea of battle and war was holy. And those who fought in battle or fought in a war had to be holy themselves. And the holiness that is being talked about here, and this is out of the Torah, out of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, is that you're not participating in sexual intimacy. That means you were clean. If you remember the story of David and Bathsheba, when Uriah came home, she's pregnant and David wants to hide it, so he calls her husband from the front lines. He doesn't sleep with her. It's because that he's still his squad, his battalion is still at war, still in battle, and he wants to remain pure, clean, holy, so that he can return to them. So he doesn't sleep with her. That's this idea here. And so David says, David says, okay, so he explains that the men have not been with women. And by the way, that's true, because the men didn't exist in the first place. So Ahimelech gives him the loaves of bread. Now this would be a loaf of bread for every tribe of Israel. So there's 12 loaves of bread that he hands to David. I can't imagine him being able to carry anything else. There must have been some kind of sack that they were able to put the loaves of bread in so David could carry it. And then he believes that David is on this sacred mission, and so he has no problem giving David that bread. Okay, so here we are. We're on level 3 of strangeness. It's like he asked for bread. There's no other bread but the holy bread, the bread of presence. That's the only bread in the whole village. What a strange story. So level 3, strange here already. Okay. All right. So now we move down to in the story. This is verse 7 now. Now in verse 7, really it kind of in verse 6, but for sure in verse 7. In verse 6, there's this narration that begins. It's like, so the priest gave him consecrated bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place when it was taken away. Now, this is being presented to us in verse 6 like somebody's watching this, like someone's observing this. And then in verse 7, we're told who it is that's watching. Okay? Now, one of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. In other words, he was in the sanctuary. Okay? And his name was Doeg, the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. Now, first of all, Edomites have constantly been in conflict with the Israelites from like day one. Edomites are the descendants of Esau, Jacob and Esau. And there has always been a conflict exist between the Israelites, the people of Israel, and the Edomites. Okay, this is Doeg is from Edom, and somehow or another Saul has conscripted him to be the chief of his shepherds. Now he's probably there to present animals for sacrifice. Okay, but we're going to learn that Doeg is one of the most evil men in the Old Testament. He is someone who creates and commits a heinous, very heinous act. Now, we won't get much of that meaning in this chapter, but we will come to see that Doeg is an agent of Satan, is the way I would describe it. And he's at the tabernacle. In other words, he's actually in the tabernacle. Which, as I was thinking about that and reflecting on it, I came up with this question: does Satan attend church? And I said yes. Yes, he does. And the reason I said that is now it's a personal history. I could be very, very wrong. Okay? And I need to be corrected because of that. But I will say to you that some of the most painful experiences of my life has been at the hands of people who practice churchianity, not Christianity. There's a difference. They're in the church. They practice churchianity. In other words, like the church is their thing. The church is their gig. The church is their club. You don't mess with that. You don't do anything that would mess with how they have put together their church. But that often causes them to lose sight of what it means to live for Jesus, to live in a Christian way, to live in a Jesus-like way. And I'll tell you, so when you ask me, does Satan attend church? I'll say, yeah, he does. And I've had experiences, at least in my mind, that verifies that. Okay, so here we are. We're at level 3, strange. Now, level 4, strange is that David says after this, he says, David said to Ahimelech, now is there not a spear or a sword on hand? For I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's matter was so urgent. And then the priest said, well, the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, behold, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Now, in other words, it's just in storage. Okay? And if you want to take, if you would take it for yourself, then take it. For there is no other except it here. It's the only sword that's here. And David says, there is none like it. Give it to me. Okay, now we're up to level 4 strange, because now here's this guy on a secret mission for the king. He's been commissioned by the king. It's top secret, but he has no weapons. None. Really? Really? I mean, you would start out on this mission for the king without any weapons? And then now, level 5 strange, then we move up another level when we find out that Goliath's sword is here in the tabernacle. Here it is in the tabernacle. Why? Why is it here? And then we'll add another level, level 6 strange. David says, give it to me. Now let's ask this question. How useful will a giant sword be to David? I mean, if you really have looked at the dimensions of who Goliath was and what his spear was like, what his shield was like, then you would assume that this sword would be mammoth. And for some teenager to be wielding this giant sword, would that be of any benefit to him? So why would David say, give it to me? I mean, we're at level 6 strange now. And then we're going to add another level 7 strange. David leaves with Goliath's sword, and where does he go? He goes to the king of the Philistines and the hometown where Goliath grew up. Has he lost his mind? Look at this. Verse 10. Then David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of this one as they danced, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Now David took these words to heart, and he greatly feared Achish, the king of Gath. So, in other words, why in the world did he go there? So he disguised his sanity before them and acted insanely in their hands, and scribbled on the doors of the gate and let his saliva run down into his beard. And then Achish said to his servants, behold, you see the man behaving as a madman. Why did you bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this one to act the madman in my presence? Shall this one come into my house? And that's how the chapter ends. Okay, so now, so here we are at level 7 strange. David leaves Nob. He leaves with Goliath's sword. And then he goes to the king of the Philistines, Achish. And he goes to the hometown of where Goliath is from. This is crazy. Now, they get a hold of him in Kish, and they begin to wonder. David begins to get afraid. Now, why he went to Kish could be that Saul was relentless in his pursuit of David, and so maybe he thought that if he went to this foreign land, he would be safe. But when they recognize him, when he realizes they know exactly who he is, then he becomes very, very afraid. This is Goliath's king, and he's carrying Goliath's sword. And, that would be very recognizable in that day. And obviously, this is the king of the 10,000 men that David has slain. And, then they recognize him. They call him the king of the land. Now, what they're talking about is they're not saying that he's king of Israel. What he's saying is that this is a guy who rules the ground that he walks on. In other words, he's an exceptional soldier. And it wasn't unusual for someone who was an incredible soldier to go to other kings, other countries, other groups of people and sell their services to that king. And often kings would even recruit or look for such people. So this wasn't that unusual, but when David realizes they recognize him as the one who killed Goliath, then he gets very afraid. And so what he does is that he begins, in verse 13, he begins to act insane, like he's lost his mind. He has lost his mind, leaving Israel and going to the very place that he has slain a champion of the Philistines. This is just strange level number 8. I mean, it's just like one level after another of strangeness. And so Achish wants nothing to do with him, and then that's where the chapter ends. So let me try to make sense of some of this strangeness that we've been looking at. Just a couple of observations. One is this: who do you go to when trouble comes to you? Not where. I didn't ask where do you go. I'm asking who do you go to when trouble comes to you? Who is in your life that can represent the presence of the Lord? That's what Ahimelech did. Who is in your life that can represent the presence of the Lord when trouble has turned your world upside down? Who is that? Do you have someone like that? You know, I'm sure all of you have seen a trampoline. You know what I'm talking about when I say the word trampoline. You know how you can get up on a trampoline and you can just bounce all you want to. Well, the reason why you bounce all you want to is because the mat that you're jumping on is surrounded and connected to hundreds of springs. And so when something hits that material and pushes it down, it's able to spring back up because of all the springs that are surrounding it. And that's what we need as well. Because, beloved, in this life, trouble's going to slam us down. It's going to take us as low as it can take us sometimes. But if we don't have any springs that surround our life, then there's no way we can bounce back. Who do you go to when trouble comes to you? And by the way, have you thanked those people for being that in your life? But more than that, who is in your life that really truly represents the presence of the Lord to you? Because that's what you really need. That's the first place David goes. Is that the first place you go? Now, you know, David could have just brainstormed on his own, worked, you know, to do everything he could by himself, but he doesn't do that. Now that's what Scott Latham does. Scott Latham just sits in his house and ponders, okay, I could do this, then I could do this, and I could do this. When what I really need to do is I need to be seeking out the presence of the Lord. And sometimes when trouble hits me, I can't find the presence of the Lord. So then what I need to do is go find someone who represents that to me. And I'm thankful that I have people like that in my life. I'm so grateful for them. But what do? You know, when trouble shows up, who do you go to? That's my first observation. And then a second observation is this. And this, beloved, this is so simple, and and I'm almost ashamed to say it to you because it's just so obvious, and it's not anything that you wouldn't already know. But I just want to say it, okay? The second observation is this: not everything about life, not everything about God, not everything about people, not everything about yourself can be explained. Like, I can't explain a lot of this chapter. A lot of the things that take place here are just strange. Some things will just be strange in our life, a mystery, and especially some things in our relationship with God. We're declaring, and I believe it's true, that we have a relationship with a supreme being, a being that is so far greater than we can even imagine. And so that means that there's going to be some things in our relationship that are mysteries. I would say even sometimes strange. When it comes to a life of faith, there is some certainty, but beloved, not as much as we think. I know a lot of people who, when they come to following Jesus, what they want is everything in black and white. They want everything certain. And I'm saying now that there is some certainty in this walk with Jesus, but it's not as much as we think it is. That there is just going to be mystery. There's just going to be things that are unexplainable. There's going to be things that are just strange. You know, in 1 Peter, we're described as a peculiar people. Well, that word peculiar means strange. We're a strange people. As the world looks at us, we're strange. We are a strange people because we trust a God that we can't see. We trust a story that we don't always understand. And we trust when so much in the world says we shouldn't. There's just going to be strangeness in this walk. And I guess the reason why I'm wanting to lift that up, it's not anything you don't already know. You know this, but I want to encourage you to continue to embrace it. That there just isn't the kind of certainty that we would want in this walk with Him. There is just strangeness that will come, and we need to learn to embrace it. Well, beloved, that's chapter 21 for us tonight. I'll tell you, I barely scratched the surface of it. I mean, there is so much there, so much that we need to unpack. And there is even more that is going on behind the chapter that I just wasn't able to get to. But here it is, presented to you for your consideration, and I pray that there is some benefit that you'll find in this study. Thanks for joining us tonight and being a part of this with us. And I look forward to sharing with you next week on chapters 22 and 23. Be blessed and have a great week. Bye-bye.